Good morning, everyone. My name is David Coughlin. I'm the Associate Director of the Center on Global Economic Governance at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. I'm extremely pleased to welcome you this morning to the presentation by Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Søvndal. He will be introduced, and the discussion will be led by Professor Katharine Pistor, Michael I. Sovern Professor of Law at Columbia Law School, and a faculty associate of the Center on Global Economic Governance. Without further ado, I leave the floor to Katharina.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to introduce to you the Denmark's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Søvndal. He has been a member of the Danish Parliament since 1994 and was the leader of the Socialist Party from 2005 until September 2012. He was appointed to the post of Minister for Foreign Affairs by Prime Minister Helle Thorning-Schmidt in October 2011. He has a background in teaching. He also told me that he spent some early years in Germany dealing with handicapped children and learning German. We've just been having our conversation actually in German. And I can't tell you the contents of our conversation, but we also had a very interesting conversation a few minutes ago about Germany's election results from last night. So these issues will haunt us later in the discussion, but I really don't want to take up too much time right now because I think we should hear from him first, and then I will start the discussions with some questions and later on take questions from the audience. Minister Søvndal, the floor is yours, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, academic staff and students, first and foremost, thank you very much for inviting me to speak here today on the School of Global Economic Governance. It's an honor and it's a pleasure as well. With such a broad academic field, I could speak about many things, but I think in this moment in time, it's interesting for you to hear about the state of play of the European economy and how we have responded to the crisis in a way that has made Europe emerge both sounder but also stronger. Also, I will use this opportunity to tell you about how Denmark is approaching the job and growth agenda and how this has served us very well during the last years of economic difficulties. But first, let me pass a short moment on the global developments which have changed the political and economic framework. A lot has happened since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now powers have moved into the fray. New powers have moved into the fray. New challenges have emerged. Global competition has become more fierce, and the Western world is no longer the innovative force by definition. On top of all this, climate change has proven to be a major challenge that we need to take very seriously. Despite of setbacks and troubles, the world today is a better place than it was 50 years ago. Democracy and freedom has progressed, and human rights are spreading. In many countries, people have seen economic growth and improved social conditions. Millions of people have escaped poverty, and international trade flows reach wider than ever before. These are all necessary components of global progress, of security, political stability, economic progress, and development which go hand in hand. In this very much changed global setting, the transatlantic relationship has proven its worth. Individually and together, Europe and US have played key roles in promoting such developments, inspired by our own democracies, our common values, and not least the progress we have made in our home countries. In this new multipolar world, Europe and US together make up a very strong balancing force in both political and economic developments. In this setting of almost constant progress, I think it's fair to say that we very that we were all unprepared for the hardship that hit us as a result of the financial crisis. In Europe, we had come to take our welfare model and our relative wealth for granted. Suddenly, this had to change. As the crisis evolved, it was clear that deep reforms were needed not only in form of surveillance mechanism and stronger economic coordination, but also in the structure of our individual economies. In many countries, the normal way of life was threatened. People all over Europe have experienced hardship and tough times, and across Europe our solidarity is put to a test. Politicians in every country had to demonstrate strong leadership and make necessary, but not necessarily popular, political choices. Only this way could we prevent the crisis from spreading and pave the way for a return to sound public finances, and thereby achieve our main goal to create more growth and more jobs. I know that Europe has been often criticized for doing too little, too late, but I actually believe that way we are doing it has been rather impressive. The European Union is made up of 28 countries, and this means 28 parliaments and 28 peoples who have to make tough political choices with unemployment was going up and the value of ordinary people's saving disappeared. And yet we did manage to make important and significant reforms. We have introduced new financial regulation and is currently working on developing a banking union inside of the EU. We're expanding and refining the internal market to help business growth and create new jobs across Europe. We have strengthened our economic surveillance mechanisms and tightened and expanded our economic cooperation. And we are carefully prioritizing our resources so that we do not strangulate growth and employment in our effort to consolidate our economies. Last month, we saw the first sign of the European zone emerging from the crisis. This is wonderful news, but it is not yet time to rest. We must stay focused on implementing the reforms we had agreed on and on maintaining economic discipline. We still have a long way to go to restore acceptable employment levels and regain our competitiveness. This is where the Danish experience is very relevant. Just like the other Nordic countries, we have had our welfare model for many decades, and it has clearly demonstrated that low taxes and unregulated markets is not the only way to economic growth. Some of you may have read The Economist's recent feature articles on this. I think it was from February. In short, the Danish welfare model is a system with high taxes, which provides the funding for relatively high unemployment benefits, free education from kindergarten to graduate school, a generous child and family policy, comprehensive care for disabled or social marginalized citizens, and free, universal and equal access for all Danes to our health care system. The idea is that everyone contributes according to ability and benefits according to need. We have a very high level of tax income relative to GDP and one of the largest income distributions. Put in a different way, it's difficult to become very rich, but it's even harder to become very poor. Still, Denmark consistently ranks among the most competitive nations of the world. Our workforce is well educated, and Danes switch jobs and start new business at rates far above those in other welfare states. This is often attributed to the success of our flex security system that combines flexible rules for hiring and firing with financial security in case of unemployment, all of which takes place within a framework of an active labour market policy. Despite the relative success of the Nordic and Danish model, we know that we have to keep reforming in order to stay competitive and maintain our welfare system. My government has done just that, but we have tried to do it in a way that maintains Denmark as a socially inclusive and an equal society. The main aim of the reforms have been to secure our prosperity and welfare model on a high level. It has not been seen, and it's not been easy, but it has to be done. Just like we have shown, the economic and social policies can successfully go hand in hand, Denmark has also proven that economic and environmental policies can complete each other. Since 1980, our economy has undergone a great transition, and we have become a global leader in the development of new sustainable technologies and solutions. Meanwhile, our economy has grown by almost 80%, while our energy consumption has remained constant and our CO2 emission has been reduced. So don't let anyone fool you. Being green doesn't mean to give up economic growth. We continue to pursue the green agenda, and we are aiming at being completely independent from fossil fuels by 2050. Our green policies are thereby helping both our economy and the climate and the environment and creating new jobs. It's also good for our health. About half of all Copenhageners are biking to work and other activities every day. As a small open economy, we are strong believers in free trade and level playing fields for our businesses across the world. So for many years, we have been pushing for an EU-US free trade agreement. The transatlantic trade and investment partnership has huge potential. This is why we should strive for a quick and ambitious outcome for the ongoing negotiations. The figures speak for themselves. Together we have more than 50% of the global GDP. 2/3 of top research and development companies are located in our countries. And we trade for more than $650 billion each year. But calculations show that our export to each other could increase by two-figured percentages if an agreement is reached. This alone is reason enough to be ambitious. But another reason is that an agreement would further align our standards and regulations and ensure more mutual recognition. Given the size of the transatlantic market, this will inspire others and pretty much dictate global standards. In this world, with new rising economic powers, this is in our strong interest. None of us could do that alone. We both need each other. A strong transatlantic relationship is crucial for us to improve, develop, and safeguard our economies and societies. The crisis has demonstrated to all Europeans the values of standing by each other and the importance of being big. These are considerations that should also guide us in the trade negotiations between US and Europe. Standing together, we have much greater impact globally. This is true economically and also politically. The world needs our leadership to ensure that we continue the progress I mentioned in the start of my speech, so the world develops into a peaceful, sustainable, and socially acceptable way. It can be done, but we should do it together and let it happen. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for these introductory remarks. I mean, Denmark, of course, is a very interesting country, a relatively small country, not only globally, but also within the European Union, bordering on one of the largest economies, or the largest economy in the European Union, which is Germany. And I would like to explore with you a little bit what it actually means for a small country to operate in the shadow of a really large economy, and also what it means for a small country that is within the European Union but not part of the eurozone to deal with both the crisis in the eurozone but also with the reform agenda that is being put forward now within the eurozone, which of course affects the operation of the European Union as well. But let me just ask a question first about Denmark in sort of the shadow of Germany, or actually living next to a really powerful neighbor. A couple of economic studies have shown that some countries do quite well doing that. You could say in some ways East Germany had to come to terms with that when it merged with West Germany, but other countries like Slovenia, probably the Czech Republic, Slovakia have done quite well as well, adjusting to the need to deal with a country that is a powerhouse, is a major exporter, with whom they have important trade relations, but without going down the path that maybe Greece has gone down or maybe Portugal has done, which means losing a lot of its industrial base and really being in the remote shadow of a really large economic power. So I'm wondering whether you could say a few words about that before we take it to the Eurozone questions.
Thank you very much. I think you could say that we have a very good and strong relationship with our big neighbor. A lot of people work across the border, a lot of political cooperation between Denmark and Germany, a lot of trade. Denmark and Germany is Denmark's biggest trading partner. Some 16% of our trade is going with Germany, Britain another big one, Sweden a third big one. And we live from trade with big neighbors. So we have a lot of the advanced technology, which we are not a very big country, and therefore also not a country of very big companies. Nevertheless, we have some which might be known, like Vestas, who are producing the windmills. We have some of the advanced companies on green technology because we made that decision by the end of the 70s when the first oil crisis came, not to be dependent on oil. We had no oil ourselves at that time. We have no nuclear power, so we have to go other ways. And that forced through new technology, closing that gap I mentioned between the growth in GDP and the growth on energy consumption. Mm-hmm. So I think our possibility is to be a very innovative economy, have a very close cooperation between a strong welfare state, also on education and research, and small private companies, which with a flex security model are able to change very quickly when the market changes. So this playing together between a public sector and a very flexible private sector might be one of the strongest competences that we have.
Could you say a word more about this? Because we for a long time I think the word industrial policy was sort of a no-go zone in economic policy making. I think we're coming back to something like that. There's a lot of research being done on Brazil, for example, in Latin America, where the government has taken a more proactive role again. And I think in many continental European countries, governments have tried to set the stage for private companies to be competitive within their own countries, but also within the broader region in Europe or globally. So I think to understand sort of the institutional setup in which these private-public partnerships, collaborative relations can emerge would be really helpful for us to understand from this side of the Atlantic as well.
Let's take the green part of it as well, and you can yourself put it to other sectors. I think we could never have achieved that leading position as a green nation had it not been for the political decisions which were taken the last 30 years. very high taxation on energy. You could get bonus if you renewed your house in a way that your energy consumption was falling very much. We secured the price for wind energy and solar energy on a higher level to be able to develop the new products that were needed. You could not have done that, I think, without a very strong public sector willing to take these decisions. But you could not have made them work if you did not have a private sector following up and using the possibilities, seeing the possibilities that came. I think that's one of the reasons. Another reason, I think, is that we have a very high skilled labor market. The free access to education all the way means that we have a lot of young people taking educations. We have a lifelong education programs with those one who came out of school with very short educations. We try to keep up with educations because the number of jobs for unskilled labor is going rapidly down. So we have to ensure that we have a labor force that's so well educated that they can move into the new areas. Mm-hmm. Then we also, I think that must be added, also has a very long tradition for being a very open economy, meaning that we were never, like some of the Southern European countries, falling asleep without being competed from outside, which I think is a very sound discipline, because it forces you to be on the very front, not only on the green agenda. I visited China last time in December, and what China saw as interesting, and the African countries see as interesting in our model, I think is both the green agenda, that we are the leading country within green technology, but it's also our welfare model somehow that has got interesting, again you could say, in the way that we can both be the most happy people in the world, which we always used to be, and I think it's something to do with the safety of the life, that if you get sick, if your child gets sick, there's someone to pick you up. Do you jump trampolines here in the gardens? Sometimes you have a net around it because you dare let your children jump higher then, because they do not fall down if an accident happens. I think that's the secret of our model, to find out a basic security where the young people, the people dare to jump higher, because there's some kind of security catching them if they are on their way out. We can also see a very high growth on agricultural product. That's another part of our strongholds. We have a very strong shipping cluster as well. I think most of you know Maersk, who is transporting around the world. So we have a lot of these strong clusters whom we try to help also from public side. Okay. Yes.
So let me just shift a little bit towards Europe, the European Union and the eurozone. So to what extent has actually Denmark benefited from being part of the European Union? And maybe you can also say a few words what prompted the decision not to join the eurozone, at least not immediately, how that decision is being reassessed inside your country in light of the eurozone crisis. And then I think more generally how Denmark experienced the eurozone crisis, what the challenges for your country were in dealing with that crisis, which I think is still ongoing, but we can come to that point. I think you rightly pointed out that we're looking at some better figures that have come out recently, but I'm not sure we're quite done yet, but we can come back to that.
But we are very much in favor of European cooperation, very much. We have all our 2/3 of our trade we do with European countries, after that US, and after that the new emerging markets, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, etc. We're also interested for another reason. We managed to overcome a very long period of conflicts in Europe Today it was unthinkable that a new war would break out in Europe, that conflicts would not be managed around a negotiation table. It takes a long time sometimes. It also put high standards to the countries who want to be member of the European Union. If the Balkan countries want to enter, we put up high standards on economic security, on legal reforms, on political rule of law. And only if you access to that rule, you can get closer. And it's nice to be attractive in the way that you can put up high standards. Then we have a discussion which is going to be concluded in November with Ukraine. Our claim to them is that if they want to be members, they have to make electoral reforms. They have to release some of their political prisoners. They have to make economic social reforms that make them ready to get closer to the EU. So I think it's a very strong weapon in the hands of us that we can transform countries that way by putting up claims on a high level if they want to enter. And we have a very big interest in living in a peaceful surrounding. That's one important thing. We are not members of Euro. We are outside, but we are linked to all the central criteria of the Euro. We have a band without 0.3% where the Danish crown can move around the Euro. So we are very closely linked. In fact, the only thing we do not have is the currency. We tried in the year 2000 to make a referendum in Denmark. The politician lost. It would be even more difficult today because the eurozone crisis, I think, is very deep in the mind of people. So we'll not be able to win a referendum, even if we want it. But it's not so bad because we are in a secure position because we are so narrowly linked to the euro. And even in the period where euro had its problem, I think it was a benefit for us to be outside because where the euro was considered weak, we were considered a very strong European economy. So that was a good period during the crisis not to be part of it. I think you're right that the challenges in Europe are one in the way that we have put up the basically new decisions to stabilize the economic situations in Europe. We have put up a firewall, which we call it, to secure help to the weaker economies, the Greek economy, the Cyprus economy, partly the Spain economy, and partly the Italian economy as well. And I think there is an overall agreement that we need to stand together in Europe. Mm-hmm. There was a new party by the German election who got 4.8%, who wanted Germany out of the euro. But I think it's not amazing that you get 4.8% in a situation where the crises have been so deep as they have. So I'm not so scared about that tendency in Europe. I think there is another tendency which is more scaring. It's an anti-European tendency you see in a lot of countries with a lot of similar parties, also combined with anti-foreign back to the old nationalist agenda of Europe. And I think that's an extremely dangerous agenda. And I think the best weapon against that agenda is very strong European cooperation.
Okay. So let me maybe ask one or two more questions and then I will open the floor for discussion as well. So the relationship between the European Union and the eurozone is of course also an interesting relation that is sort of being reconfigured as we speak. 2 years ago, I think George Soros was still announcing in the newspapers that if the eurozone broke up, the European Union would come down. But there are now also some voices who have suggested that the separate developments within the eurozone with the banking union and closer integration here is actually posing a challenge to the European Union. So it could almost be the opposite to what George Soros has suggested, that the preservation and strengthening of the eurozone challenges the more open cooperative framework of the European Union because of the very tight, rigid agenda that is being pursued right now and where some countries are on the outside and others are in the eurozone. How do these arguments look from your end of the debate?
I think there are at least two European positions. There is a British one, where Great Britain wants to have less Europe on a lot of issues, both regulation, common foreign policy, how far to go in European cooperation. The British are very skeptical. They are an island in that way, and they talk about the continent where we live. And I think that's part of their way of thinking as well. We are on the opposite boat. We want even when we look, even we have the opt-outs we want to be as close as we can to Europe. And I think your point, or Soros' point, of the risk of the 17 Euro countries moving into a very close cooperation, and 11 countries present being around that core group, is not a good scenario seen from a Danish point of view. We want Europe to go together as closely as it can. I think there was, in the beginning of the crisis, a risk. There was a European discussion to drop Greece as part of the Euro and as part of Europe and let them go their own way. But I think the decisions have been taken now that Europe is going to stand together, and I think it eased a lot the pressure on Greece as well. Had Greece fallen outside, the next pressure would have been on Cyprus, on Italy, on Spain, and then you could see a very dangerous development with Europe renationalizing again. But I think we have far overwon that stage. We are in a position where Europe is going to stay together, is going to take the necessary discussions together, and I think also integrating even more than you have seen until now. But still, remember that it's 28 countries, it's 28 parliaments, it's 28 peoples with referendum now and then, so it doesn't move that quickly ahead.
But one final question. If you think 20 years ahead, do you think within 20 years, let's say 30, another generation or so, we will be closer to a political union in the European Union? Is this where we're moving? Fiscal union first and then political union perhaps?
I think still Europe will stay its own in a way that because Europe is built on nations. And nations who have their own identity, who have their own languages, who have their own culture. So I think you'll still see a diverse Europe. In some ways, I think it'll work together closer than it did. Let me just take foreign policy. I think the new recognition is that this world is changing so rapidly, away from today, US as a big power. If you look 20 years ahead, China is one of the real big, not only economic powers, but also political powers of this globe. If you look at C20 in 20 years, a lot of the countries who are there now will not be there anymore. You'll see a lot of new Asian countries as members of the G20. If it's not getting to the G30, not to make anyone sorry. But you'll see a total different landscape. If Europe should play its role, it's necessary to make an even closer cooperation on foreign policy. And the fact is that you can find areas where we disagree about some agendas, but you can find a lot of more areas where Europe agrees and make a common policy. And I think you'll see that even more in the years to come.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me take a couple of questions from the floor. Please raise your hand, and we have mics. David is running around with the mic. Questions? There's one right here. Yes, on the left.
If you can just come up here. We're streaming, so we want to capture you.
Thank you very much. You mentioned this safety net, the welfare state. I'm sure you're aware, in the U.S. right now there's great controversy on that, and people that just simply don't believe in a welfare system. Is there a debate in your country about how much that that net can grow, and at what point does it restrain people from the incentive of capitalism? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Very good question. Thank you very much. I remember I was sitting with the former US ambassador in Copenhagen. We were traveling together on a NATO trip. And he said, I have a problem because when I come back to the States and tell my people there that I come from a country where they pay about 40% of their income in taxes on average, and where the cars are still watched and the bus is still driven and the land's still grown, they'll tell me you have been too long in that country to see clear anymore. But in fact, the buses are being driven, the cars are being washed, the field is grown, people are going to work. We have a lower employment than you have. But of course you can only do that if you also put the demands to paying the money. I mean, you cannot choose a life where you do not want to work. If you get the money, you also have to be ready to take the jobs available. So our part of the deal is to create the jobs. I think you could call our kind of system a mixed model between private, very, as I said, flexible sector and a very strong public sector, living not as its others' contradictions, but it's our model of creating the strong growth we have managed. And that said, we have 8 political parties in Denmark. So we have a political debate. I'm from the left wing of the Danish spectrum. So I believe in the kind of welfare state we have built up. But I also believe very much in a competitive market. You could find parties on the right side who would think we should reduce public spendings a lot more. You could find also on our left side a political party who think we should make an even bigger public sector. I think we have a good balance. What we experienced through the crisis that we lost a lot of private jobs. What we are trying now is to reconstruct these private jobs, because our balance is that we need a private sector to finance the free access to education, the free access to health, all the things we do on the environmental part of it. So we cannot do without a very strong private sector. But yes, we have a debate, also a very ideology debate, and of course that's an important part of our democracy as well.
Questions, further questions from the floor? Can I just ask a follow-up question on this one? What about companies moving out of Denmark? I mean, one of the arguments that you would hear in the US or in the UK is sort of if you increase taxes and if you might want to pay for the welfare state, but you will also lose a lot of potentially tax-paying companies. Even if they sort of stay in Denmark, they will move their production offshore. So what is your experience with those kind of arguments? How real is that in Denmark? How many of your companies actually are having offshore production sites and are trying to get around your tax system, quite frankly?
We have that discussion. And of course, here you are doing with balances as well. We have Danish companies working outside of Denmark. We have a lot of them working here in the States. We just had a Vietnamese state visit. We have 130 companies in Vietnam. I think we have a couple of hundred in China, and we want that. Because we think if we shall keep creating jobs, we also have to be present where the big growth is taking place, in the US, in the Asian countries, in South America, Pacific area, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Mexico, which is a growing place for big growth just now. So we encourage our companies to go out in the world. We believe that what we can earn from that is some of the jobs in Denmark with developing products, with making the research part of it, but also producing parts of it in Denmark. At the same time, I saw a list, I think US is number 4 on the world list for companies to settle with good conditions. We are number 5, so we are close to each other. So we have companies going in and companies going out, and that's, I think, part of globalization. And the point is, we want that to happen. We do not want to be a closed economy.
Interesting. Any further questions from the floor? Yes, please. And if you could come to the mic.
Apropos of the last question, I'm wondering how you think about the fact that Denmark still probably has a larger, shall we say, more equality than the US in terms of economic distribution, how you recommend or feel about that situation.
You are right. I think we are one of the other most equal society of this world. I think it's a long tradition for our country. We had when our farmers organized themselves back 200 years ago, they did it in a way where they owned the companies for selling meat, for selling milk, for selling eggs, for slaughtering animals, etc. They organized it themselves and owned this company themselves. They do not do anymore. Then when the industrialization came, we had very strong unions, trade unions, fighting for equality, fighting for normal people's right to stand up, to empower these people through education and equality. So I think we have that very long tradition for doing it. Not only Denmark, the Scandinavian country, and you could maybe add Europe as well. Where you see the biggest differences between people is outside Europe. And I prefer a society where the differences is not getting too big, because I think it gives a chance to people who would not get a chance had it been for the differences being very big. I think it gives a society with very low crime, because it's linked, I think, to inequality as well. It gives a society with a lot of force as well, competitive. And I think that has been the big question, maybe also what some of you wonder about, how a society like that can be competitive. And the short answer is read the figures. It is possible to create this. When that's said, it's part of every country's discussion. We follow with big interest all the Americans' elections in Denmark. And I think we can see a lot of the same discussion we have as you have here. And of course, it's every citizen's right to choose the way of political future one thing is the best one. But I think it's very marginal groups who want to give up the kind of welfare model we have completed in Denmark.
Okay, I was told that we should close around this time. So unless there are any further pressing questions from the floor. Yes, one more, please. Could you come up to the mic?
Hi. As a Japanese, first of all, I would appreciate that you visited our country after a great earthquake that happened 2 years ago. And my question is, even though your country had a bad relationship during World War II between Germany because of the history, I was wondering how did the people in Denmark has overcome those histories? I mean, even we Japanese have been having a closer relationship between Korea and China. We've been still struggling with those issues nowadays. So I was wondering how the people in Denmark has been overcome those, past errors.
Thank you.
That's right. Europe, I think we often forgotten how short time it is ago that this continent was ruined by war and bloody wars. If you look at the situation today, we are all very scared when we see the pictures out of Syria. Or before that, and daily also out of Iraq, out of Egypt when the violence was taking place there. But remember the figures. It's sad enough, but it's 110,000 people having been killed in Syria. It was around 1,000, 1,500 in Egypt. So compared to the figures we had during the Second World War, where it was more than 20 million killed, we live in that way, peaceful period. I think we learned from not only the Second World War, but also from the First World War, and a number of wars before that, that it not only weakened us, it also, we had to find ways through that. And I think the founders of the European Union saw the necessity of building the strong bloc between France and Germany, who had their troubles back in time as well. And the idea of making a union among all the countries, I think that's what made Europe a more peaceful place. Denmark and Germany had some struggle about the border where that should be drawn. There was a votation back after where people were voting if they wanted to be in Denmark or wanted to be in Germany after the First World War. And today I was just down making a speech in June, in the month of June, for the Danish minority living in Germany. They are supported from Germany. Their culture, their school, they are running political parties. We are doing the same on the Nordic part of the border for the German minority. We made an agreement in 1955, the Bonn-Copenhagen Agreement, to support each other minorities, to live peacefully together. But of course, we did that also in a long period where Europe was becoming richer. We are very much aware of the tensions on the East China Sea, about the islands there. I do really hope that it'll be possible to settle that peacefully. I think both China, Japan and Korea and all the other countries involved try to do their best that this conflict is not running out of control. And as far as this, they succeeded. But we all know how dangerous it is if the nationalist card is played. And I think that's a real risk. So we use our presence there to try to convince them to find ways of this. I might maybe just add that we have another part of the world where the borders have not been drawn there yet, in Arctic. There we are sitting together, US, Russia, Canada, and the Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries, and discussing borders, drawing borders. Everything has succeeded very peacefully. Last I was in Canada, we were making a line between Canada and Greenland, 3,000 kilometers in peace. We have one little island where the walruses are coming, which we still have to settle. We'll do that peaceful as well. The Norwegians and the Russians agreed around Svalbard, and today 95% of the whole sea has been divided. So I think that's a good example that it's possible, even between countries who sometimes disagree, to make peaceful arrangement about the same. And I hope this world, this will be my last word, has involved so far that there is a higher standard of solving conflict than there was when I was a young man. I spent my young life traveling around in Eastern Europe when that was all non-democratic regimes over there. Today they are all democratic countries. I spent my 23rd and 24th year traveling around in South America in 75 to 76, when that was all military right-wing dictatorships, from Chile to Argentina to Brazil to Venezuela, etc. Today, more or less, they are all functioning democracies. In Europe at that time, we had still dictatorships, in Portugal, Al-Salazar, in Spain with Franco, in Greece with the Greek military there. Last, even Myanmar, Burma, is on an irreversible change into democracy. And all the trouble we see now in the North African and the Middle East country is linked to the difficult transmission of countries having been dictatorships on their way to being democratic countries. This is not an easy road, it's not a straight way, but nevertheless it's a way. So there is a lot of reason for hope, and there is a lot of reason to continue to work with the most difficult places on this earth. And believe me, if we meet in 20 years, we'll make the conclusion then within these 20 years, this world emerged even further in the way that we succeeded with the fight against poverty. The average living age in people has increased. The number of children going to school is bigger than it was 20 years ago. The number of people living in democracies is bigger than it was 20 years ago. So if I'm invited, we can meet and celebrate that. Thank you very much.
On that hopeful note, let me